Norwich Confidential with your hosts, Dr. Ben Hong, Bonnie Hong, and Mr. Bob Farwell. Bonnie Hong, and welcome to Norwich Confidential. Ben is taking the night off because we have 2 seats occupied by our guests, and so he decided that, you know, the ladies should have both of the seats. So we will start. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago sponsored by the Connecticut, the Sierra Club of Connecticut chapter, and by the Food and Water Watch. So both of these organizations sponsored this very informative program about the pipeline coming through Connecticut. It was something I had not heard about. And obviously was very interested in. So I went up to Willimantic, which is where I attended the meeting. They had them statewide. They had a number of them. And I was really surprised, to say the least, about the pipeline that's not just coming through Connecticut, but will be coming through Norwich. So I wanted to know a little bit more about it, and I asked our guests if they would like to come on the show and talk a little bit about how this is going to be affecting our community. So let me introduce our guests to you. First, we have Jen Siskine. She is the local coordinator for foodandwaterwatch.org. I love that website, by the way.
Thank you.
You guys are constantly keeping me abreast of the things that I really need to be aware of, just for my own personal health and the health of my family. But never mind what's happening nationally. I like the website a lot. And our other guest is Martha Klein, who is the communications chair for the Sierra Club, the Connecticut chapter. And again, since I've been a member of the Sierra Club, I obviously knew about the national website.
Yeah.
So welcome, ladies,
Thank
to
you.
Norwich Confidential.
Thanks for having us.
Let me first ask, why, having been to that meeting, why should I be concerned about a pipeline that just comes through the state? Isn't a pipeline just this metal tube that protects everything inside it, you know, like our telephone lines and electric lines?
So just to put it into context, the reason that people should be concerned is that the amount of gas that's going to be brought into and across our state is increasing exponentially. And the reasons to be concerned about it are really economic and environmental. So economically, we don't really need this gas. The gas industry, due to fracking, and I'd like to hear more about that from Jen a little later, the fracking industry has been bringing a lot more gas onto the market. That's caused the price to decline, and they need to get this gas exported because there aren't enough customers domestically to buy all the gas.
Well, let me stop you there, because we have our own public utility, and there was a big push in the community to convert from oil to gas. I bought into that. We got rid of our gas.
Your oil,
my oil
and
tanks
changed to natural gas,
and it cut our bills substantially. And then I felt like I was doing something good for the environment. So why shouldn't we be switching from oil to gas?
So for 2 reasons, for economics and for the environment. The reason that it was cheaper for you is because that's being subsidized by ratepayer fees. So for everyone in the state of Connecticut, we all had fees put onto our electrical bills. And most people have noticed their electrical bills have gone up over the last couple of years. And those fees have been used in part to subsidize customers like you who have been persuaded that it would be better to switch to gas. So that's one reason why it was cheaper for you. Another concern about it is that what we didn't know a few years ago when that big push started, and even environmentalists were saying we should switch from oil to gas, what we didn't know then and what we do know now is there's no environmental benefit. There is specifically no climate change benefit to switching from oil to gas. In other words, using methane gas, which is what natural gas is just as terrible for the climate, for climate disruption, as using coal and oil. When you burn gas, you produce less carbon dioxide than you do from coal and oil. So that appeared a couple of years ago to be an improvement, but now our ability to measure methane is a bit more sophisticated than it was. And it turns out that methane is terrible for the environment. We're not saving anything by making those conversions.
Are you talking about the unused methane? Like there's the methane cloud currently.
Right, right.
That
What people really don't understand, because there's been such a massive public relations campaign by both our elected officials and by the gas industry, is that when you're drilling for natural gas, you are releasing unburned gas into the atmosphere, and it's primarily methane, and methane is 87 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is.
And it gets released from pipelines as well. It's worse at the point of drilling.
Yeah. Every stage from the point where you're drilling it to how you're delivering it to the end use customer, there's leakage and emission loss along the way.
Some of which are
through
intentional.
the pipes?
Exactly, yeah.
Why,
yeah.
How can it leak through the pipes?
Because we have 100-year-old pipe systems that are buried in the ground in our country, in our state, that were originally made from cast iron. That are leaking. We have steel pipes in the ground that are rusting, that are leaking. The rate of replacing these pipes is marginal at best.
Companies aren't motivated financially to make the repairs.
Actually, on your gas bill, the price that you're paying includes the cost of all the gas that's being leaked out into the atmosphere.
Lost and unaccounted for.
Unaccounted for gas is passed on to the ratepayer. It's not paid for by the gas company. It's paid for by you.
How much gas is actually leaked out of? Well, we're putting in a new gas line, right? That's going through the entire state.
Right.
These will be new pipes.
Yeah, we actually have 5 projects that are currently being proposed for Connecticut.
Proposed?
Yeah.
Not approved yet.
Some are approved, some are already proposed.
Is the one that is going through the state of Connecticut, the southern part of the state,
Right.
that goes, and then there's a line that's coming down directly to Norwich.
Right. If you were looking at the picture of
That's
the
mainly
state,
approved.
yeah, if you were looking at a picture of the state, we already have 2 gas lines that enter in Danbury and go diagonally all the way across the state and exit out near Putnam into Rhode Island. And that's called the Algonquin gas line.
Right.
And in numerous parts of the state, there's projects that are going to be either lifting pipe out of the ground and replacing it with much larger diameter pipe, or running what's called a loop, which is putting an additional pipe into the ground adjacent to where the pipe already exists.
And leaving old pipe in the ground.
Right.
So the
what,
old pipe wouldn't be used. It would be the new pipe that's being used?
both. The existing pipe that's in the ground would continue to be used, but in some areas of the state they're going to take out smaller diameter pipe. Like, for example, here in Norwich, actually practically right across the street at Dodd's, going right past Dodd Stadium, there's going to be a 9-mile section of pipe that is currently it's only 6 inches in diameter, so that's about 6 inches. It's going to be lifted out of the ground, that 9-mile section, and replaced with a 16-inch diameter pipe.
Is that because we're using more natural gas here?
Well, that's what will happen, yeah, is more will be burned in this area.
We should really clarify that, though. Why are we using more natural gas in the state of Connecticut? It's because the state and the DEEP, the Department of Energy, are trying to encourage people to convert. They're trying to convert almost 300,000 homes and businesses to using gas that don't have it now. So people like you and other people in the state that are green-minded are persuaded by Eversource ads that they want to convert to gas. So that we don't have the need for the demand, there isn't the demand for the amount of gas that's going to be brought through these pipelines. The supply that's coming through these pipelines vastly exceeds the demand in our state. So our state is going to deal with that in a couple of ways, and one is trying to vastly increase the amount of use of gas within our state by encouraging customers to convert by using incentives, economic incentives. And then the other thing that's going to happen with that gas, a lot of that gas, more than half of it going through the AIM and the other interstate pipelines, is going to be going all the way to the coast of Maine for export overseas.
Okay, so we've got some that's being exported. But when you talk about the economic incentives, like, yes, there's a period of time where, you know, if you converted from oil to gas, you had, I think, $1,000 assistance in doing that conversion. We didn't meet that timeline, so we didn't get that incentive. However, we did it for a couple of reasons. Number one, we knew that we would save a substantial amount of money every month during the cold winters. And we saw that reflected immediately in what we were paying for heat for our home.
Right.
It was a dramatic drop in the cost. However, one of the reasons I pushed for it was because I did think it was less of an environmental hazard.
Right.
That's why most people were persuaded to switch.
Now,
Yeah.
in Norwich, we were working, like right now, we only produce 5% of our energy here from hydroelectric. We are
That's much more
hopefully-
local energy than virtually most communities in Connecticut have, by the way.
And yes, it is.
Much more.
And I know that the plans, one of the reasons why we're having the representative from our local DPU come on is because there are plans to increase that locally produced energy to 25% within hopefully a reasonable period of time, but through both the water power and solar. They're expecting to put up a solar farm. They've been experimenting with wind. One of the elementary schools near the senior center has a number of things that are generated now by the wind that's up there.
Right.
So I think that we had a general direction toward really renewable energy in our community. So when I first saw this pipeline to increase the number of users of natural gas, I just thought that we already had an abundance, and that's why there were these incentives. I had no idea that we were trying to get more.
Right, and that's what we're seeing at a state level, and that's what we're seeing at a national level as far as our energy policy is concerned. We are currently looking to massively increase the amount of natural gas that's coming into the state to burn at electric power plants. These enlarged pipelines will also be exporting gas through the state, as Martha mentioned, all the way up through Maine. The Department of Energy has already approved gas to be exported out to Canada, and currently moving along in the approval process are liquid natural gas terminals in Nova Scotia that will be exporting domestic gas
That's been
overseas to, where they're currently selling gas 4 to 5 times the price of what is being sold here in the United States. So as Martha mentioned, we currently have a very low gas price in the United States. We're looking to move
You're talking about natural gas.
natural
prices.
gas,
Okay.
yes. And because there's a glut, there's been so much drilling that's been going on, a lot of it in the Northeast in Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale.
Right.
So that has basically bottomed out the cost of natural gas. So right now you have a temporary lull in the price of gas, but once all these export stations the terminals get built and we start exporting gas overseas, we're going to see an increase in gas prices. And look at what's going to happen to us here in Connecticut. We're going to be generating 50% of our electricity from natural gas, and at the same time, prices are going to go up significantly.
Where are the plants that are generating electricity through natural gas?
Well-
Oxford just got approved to build a new gas-powered power plant
Are
in
there-
the town of Oxford, and it's on a Spectra line. It's not owned, this power plant won't be owned by Spectra, but they were just approved to do that. And by the way, that power that will be produced in Oxford isn't needed in Oxford, and it won't be used there locally like you're talking about. There's local power being generated for Norwich. That's not the case. The power that will be produced at that power plant is going to be exported to other parts of New England because it just isn't needed there. It's a little small, fairly rural community.
Will it still use that electricity first and have the surplus go someplace else? Or are they just coming off
No,
the...
from my understanding, there isn't an increased need for power in this little town. What there is a need for is for the electric companies, including like Eversource and Spectra and all the energy companies, to have a way to use this gas and to send the energy somewhere. It might be overseas or it might be to a different part of New England. But we really don't need it. Connecticut is one of the lowest users per capita of energy in the United States. We're actually very
Really?
conservative people. Yeah. I think Vermont and California, a few other states use less energy per capita. But Connecticut is, people are fairly conservative in their energy use. So the build out of this infrastructure that we're talking about was really never related to an issue of need. The state came up with this plan really largely based on economics. So a few years ago when DEEP and Governor Malloy and Eversource came up together and put together the Integrated Resource Plan, the IRP, and I believe that was 2011, 2012. That's the energy plan for the state of Connecticut that sets the policy going forward. And that plan, they use the word alternative energy and I think low carbon energy and renewable energy, but if you read the document, they're talking about natural gas. And so with
How
that
much
document,
of that plan actually is specific for renewable energy, for solar and for...
so it's not. That's the problem
There's
with the
none of
IRP.
it in there.
No, and it's not that there's none of it.
Well,
There
that's what
defi-
I'm asking. What
there
is in there?
absolutely are some words that specifically will say things like wind and solar. But under that same caption of renewable energy, they talk about low carbon energy, which is methane fuel, which is shale gas or natural gas people call it, but it's methane fuel.
Right.
It's a terribly destructive thing.
Right.
And they also talk about, under there, they talk about landfill recapture or trash to energy, TTE, which is a way of getting methane gas from
Back out.
garbage. And that's really bad for the environment. We should really be reducing our
Well,
garbage.
Let's start with the methane first, because I know that when NASA discovered the very large cloud on that,
Siberia.
No, in the Four
it's
Corners of the
south-
western
oh,
United
yeah,
States.
yeah.
Four
Yeah,
Corners.
in Wyoming. Yeah, in Utah.
Four Corners in the
Utah.
Midwest, right? They couldn't believe that that was what it was, because it is so large. And this came from all the oil drilling and the
Coal bed.
coal bed
mining, yeah.
mining, that all this methane was released, and now there is this huge cloud. I think they said it was the size of Rhode Island,
Right.
that is actually on the Four Corners in the southwest of the United States. I mean, that to me was alarming. It was shocking, because knowing how bad methane is as a free gas in the atmosphere, what that will do,
Right,
was very frightening.
right.
I immediately thought, why aren't they capturing that and using that as natural gas? Because in my mind, I thought that if you used natural gas, you were doing a favor to the environment.
Right.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Our state policy and our national policy is to reduce the amount of oil and coal that we're using and replace it with natural gas instead. And unfortunately, when you talk about natural gas being a clean energy fuel source, yes, when you burn natural gas compared to when you burn coal, about half the amount of carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere. And it burns cleaner. It produces less particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, other emissions. But natural gas, I like to equate it to the light cigarette of the fossil fuels. You know, for years the tobacco industry tried to tell us that if you switch to light cigarettes, you've got less tar, so you've got a healthier product for you. It's not going to be as bad, won't cause cancer. But unfortunately, when we only look at carbon dioxide, yes, natural gas burns about half as much, but the amount that we're planning to burn, both in our state and nationally, is increasing significantly. And the amount of carbon dioxide that we're going to put in the atmosphere by burning natural gas, in combination with the amount of raw methane that's leaking into the atmosphere just by drilling and delivering natural gas, is not going to improve anything for the next generation and the generation after that for climate change.
And some climate scientists are suggesting it could be worse.
It could even be worse.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
is no
they-
reason to
yeah.
stay on any fossil fuel. It's the reason to move beyond all of them.
Right.
Well, yes, I have seen where methane
Right.
is probably the most dangerous of all the gases that will cause
Right.
even worse and faster climate change than than we have already been experiencing, getting to that tipping point where there is no turning back
Right. So it's-
even quicker.
So that's where we are with our climate change issues. But the gas that's going to be coming into Connecticut is already coming into Connecticut now. I recently saw an industry report that said 60% of the gas that's coming into Connecticut is coming from the Marcellus shale fields in Pennsylvania.
You spoke a great deal about
Mm-hmm.
what has happened in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I know there were some real concerns in New York, upper state New York, when they were doing, they began doing a lot of fracking, and I know that that's now been banned, I believe, in New York. Because of the
High volume horizontal fracking, and many people don't even understand fully what fracking is.
All right, we'll start
So
with that.
I'll start with that.
Explain it.
Traditionally, we used to drill where pockets of gas had pooled up through the millennium and gathered, and we would basically stick a straw down in there and suck it out. Well, those resources are gone. So about 75 years ago, we started drilling straight down into the earth, a vertical well. We would explode something down there, we would shoot chemicals and water into the well, and we had a very small amount of area that we could disturb to get out the trapped gas that was in the rock that they were drilling into. Now what we are doing, that we started doing in the 1990s, is we're drilling much deeper into this shale rock, and then we're drilling much farther horizontally. We have gone from pumping tens of thousands, or maybe 100 to 200,000 gallons of a liquid solution into the wells, to pumping on average about 4 million gallons of fracking solution. And people think, oh, we're just pumping water down there. Well, that's not true. What we're doing is we're mixing a highly toxic chemical solution with the water and with sand. We're injecting it at very high pressure to blast open all this rock underneath the ground, and then that liquid returns to the surface as waste. It's extremely toxic, and what most people in Connecticut don't realize is that 2 years ago, we tried to pass a ban in Connecticut. The Connecticut Sierra Club, Food and Water Watch, basically every environmental group that's active in Connecticut was active trying to pass a ban from bringing any of this waste into Connecticut.
Why would they bring it into Connecticut?
They have to put it somewhere.
This waste has to be disposed of. We're producing hundreds of millions of gallons of liquid waste and hundreds of thousands of tons of solid waste.
From the fracking
From
process.
from all these wells, from high volume fracking. So
how do you dispose of that kind of waste? What do you do with it?
for Connecticut, if it's brought here, we have 3 hazardous waste treatment facilities. They're located in Bristol, Meriden, and in Bridgeport. Because Connecticut is the only state that now designates fracking waste as hazardous waste, if DEEP approves bringing this waste into Connecticut, it would first go to one of those 3 facilities. What we're concerned about is we don't want them to partially treat this waste and then send it on to additional publicly
Municipal,
owned
regular.
municipal treatment works. There's one here in Norwich. There's about a dozen in the state that are permitted to receive non-domestic waste. So what we don't want to happen is have these hazardous waste treatment facilities treat it, but only partially treat it. It
And then send it like
and
to
then
our
send it
waste
on
treatment
to
plant?
additional treatment plants in cities all around the state. Because what's happening in other states is they are finding extremely high levels of salts in the effluent that's being released into waterways. They're finding ammonium, iodide. They're finding radioactive radium-226, which has a half-life of 1,600 years.
In the treated,
In the treated effluent that's being released out into streams from treatment plants, yes.
that's very
Yeah.
frightening.
It's extremely frightening. It's extremely frightening.
So you were saying that these groups, the Sierra Club and the Food and Water Watch, tried to get legislation to
We
what?
tried-
Ban it.
we tried to-
Didn't get the ban.
We tried to get a ban passed statewide.
Having waste from the outside of the state come in to be just treated here.
Right, exactly.
And that banned, you did not get that law passed?
Just got a moratorium for 3 years.
Right. It's a temporary moratorium. As early as July 2017, DEEP, the Department of Energy Environmental Protection, can submit regulations and have them reviewed by a committee of about a dozen legislators. And if those regulations get approved, then people can start submitting to DEEP for permits to start carting this waste through Connecticut.
You know, this to me just brings to mind the fact that when we as citizens don't understand what the issues at stake are, and we leave these regulations to it really is frightening, because it's like, how can anybody, any regulatory agency, knowing that, okay, the water that will get dumped then after it's treated, get dumped into our local rivers and oceans and streams, that still contain these levels of toxic materials. How can that be allowed? In the regulations it says it's okay to then go ahead and do that?
Once they're going to pass these regulations, and what we fear is that that DEEP will pass regulations saying they can take this. We have reason to think that DEEP wants to do that. It could be an income stream for the state. So we already suspect that DEEP will indeed want to pass that regulation. So what we're trying to do, and this is particular to what Jen has been working on, is get towns, and some towns in Connecticut have started to do this, to pass bans on accepting that fracking waste, because that looks like what's going to be important. Before we get into how we're going to fight this, you brought up about the Department of Energy and how can these things happen. So I just want to make a point of how the DEEP in Connecticut fits into this energy structure. So they are very much an advocate for frack gas pipelines. So what Jen was just talking about with the AIM pipeline, which impacts Norwich.
Before you even...
Yes.
The Department of Energy is pushing this, is pushing
That's right.
gas pipelines.
Very much so.
Let me just ask, how much are they pushing for renewable energy?
A little bit.
How much is a little bit?
Connecticut's making baby steps. As an example,
If that.
Some people can have solar panels on their houses because their roof happens to face south.
Right.
They don't have trees. They have
They
sun.
own their own home.
They own their own home. Most 95% of Connecticut is not available on a residential level to have solar panels. So there's something that's called shared solar, which would allow a sunny area to put up many panels and then be able to basically share that energy with people in the nearby area.
I love that.
It's a great,
Most people love that,
Yeah.
Bonnie, except not the Connecticut legislature.
Yes,
They
and-
don't love it.
Yeah, there are 10 states in the United States that currently have a shared solar plan. And here in Connecticut, we had a bill to approve shared solar. And instead of joining and becoming the 11th state in the nation to have a shared solar plan, our legislature unfortunately put the brakes on this and decided to do a 3-year pilot study. So now we're...
Of 2 sites, I think.
Well, there's a very
Or 3.
small amount of shared solar that can be generated, so effectively it could mean just a very small number of sites. So, so instead of becoming the 11th state in the nation, expanding our renewable portfolio for our state, we've put the brakes for at least 3 years to do a pilot study.
So baby steps might be a little generous.
Yeah, so-
we're not doing
so
nearly as well as other
We're
places.
making baby steps. We currently have an agreement with the state of Rhode Island where we're going to participate in a offshore wind farm right off the coast of Block Island. Again, it's a very, very small project. What we need to be doing in the state of Connecticut is, instead of getting 50% of our electricity from nuclear and 50% of our electricity from fracked gas, we need to be moving to about 40% of our electricity from PV plants, solar plants, and about 45% of our electricity from offshore wind farms.
let me ask you,
And we have the technology to do that right now.
And it's totally realistic if you look not just nationally but globally. Fossil fuel projects are way behind renewable energy projects that are coming online right now. Many more solar.
Yes, not in the United States,
Right.
but in Europe.
In some
Scandinavia.
states. So Burlington, Vermont
Burlington,
is 100%
perfect.
renewable, and they're producing more energy than they need.
Right.
So Germany, but also in Iowa, they're now committed to getting a very large amount of their energy by wind, and they may have more wind. When you look around the country, many other places are able to do what we have not yet done as a really small state that seems to have some resources.
Well, our biggest resource being especially southern Connecticut, where we have the water. In Norwich is ideal. We have 2 rivers coming down that go into the Thames. We have tides, and there's a number of different types of technology that could be used with that. I don't understand why. Do you think that one reason why both nationally and at the state level you end up having this emphasis toward natural gas? Yes, great, we're getting off of oil and coal, but that's not really,
Well, we're
as
not,
you're
I'm sorry, Bonnie,
explaining-
we're not getting off oil and coal. So it's important to note that our plan for the state increases the use of frac gas exponentially, but does not shut down our one surviving coal plant, and absolutely does not shut down our nuke plant.
Where do we have a coal plant?
In Bridgeport.
In
Bridgeport
Bridgeport.
Harbor is still open. We have one coal plant, and it produces 1% of all our electricity, and it produces a great
In the
deal of...
entire state?
Right, 1% of all the electricity for Connecticut does come from Bridgeport Harbor plant, and it's a filthy, dirty plant. It absolutely should be shut down. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bonnie, but so the point is that all this increase in frac gas coming into and across Connecticut does not give us any benefit at all, because they're not going to shut down coal plant. They're certainly not changing anything with the nuclear plant, and we're really not expanding our renewable portfolio. So I just had to make that point.
Yeah. Actually, they do have some plans to possibly convert that plant to, unfortunately,
Gas.
burning
Yes.
fracked gas.
And in fact, one of
Yeah.
the thing was that they made PSEG has in fact proposed adding
PSEG.
that's who owns the Bridgeport Harbor plant.
PSEG?
PSEG. They've proposed adding a
What
gas
is
plant.
PSEG? Is that
Public
the
Service Energy Group?
I think you're right. Yeah.
Public Service Energy Group?
Possibly.
Is that a co-op?
I
No,
don't
no,
know.
it's
No.
privately
You know,
owned. No,
it's
no,
all
they are
privately
private. Yeah,
owned.
they are
Yeah.
privately owned.
Yeah, I'm not an energy expert, so I can't give you specifics about that. But you're a perfect example. Instead of assisting you to transition to natural gas,
Or to renewables.
right. But the state basically helped convince you that natural gas would be a great product for you to switch.
But actually,
Right.
until I went to your meeting,
Yeah.
I really thought I was doing something
Right.
good, getting off of oil
Right.
and going to natural
Right.
gas.
What we need to do to move to 100% renewables and solve our pending climate crisis is switch everybody to electric use, electric heat. We can do that through, as a private homeowner, through geothermal or through these high efficiency ductless heat pumps that are installed in your house.
But then
So-
your electric bill is
Right.
sky high.
Well, your electric bill goes up, but your other fossil fuel costs go down. And what we need to do in our state is, instead of providing electricity through natural gas, is we need to be ramping up renewables.
And that was my thought.
Yeah.
Because I really felt that, okay, once we start using more electricity, hopefully, like I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. Sorry, I do have a Tesla.
Good for you.
I mean, I love his batteries. He has new battery storage. And the direction he's going in is exactly what we really need to do. So I kept thinking that, okay, I may not live to see it, but at least, I mean, at 70, you kind of figure, okay, the expense that you can now put in your house as a senior person is substantially limited. Unfortunately, in this area, our younger homeowners, our average income in this community dropped for over $40,000. 30 years ago, the average income was in the 90s, was about 90,000. Now it's down to about 40. Oh, sorry, that's $50,000.
Yeah.
That kind of a drop in today's economy is pretty hard to sustain.
Right.
So when you are given the choice of, wow, I can get off of oil, go to natural gas that's going to be less expensive, and I'm doing something, for the environment, which was my thinking.
Right.
And then find out after you've done it that
You're
yes,
not helping the environment.
I didn't
yeah.
help the environment.
And the cost savings will be short-term for you.
But for me, I'm short term. The body doesn't last as long as
They're going to be short-term for the whole entire state, and in fact, for a lot, the costs have already started to go up for electricity in Connecticut.
Right, maybe for electricity, they have been for a while.
Right, the
which is
generation
why I could
costs.
never afford to have electric heat in my house.
Right.
Depending
That's
on
not-
how it's getting the source of the power. So in other words, once
But
we
as
get our
you-
electricity from renewable sources,
Right, but you're not going to convince a single person out there that, yes, we should all have electric heat, knowing what our electric bills are right now.
Well, if you're
That won't
using
happen.
if you're using a highly efficient electric product is the issue, because if you're using geothermal or if you're using these
Right.
highly efficient heat
When
pumps,
you depend on your public
Right.
utilities.
right? But
that-
even with the highly efficient heat pumps, they can be cost effective. Electric baseboard heat that
Right.
I had years ago, and I know how expensive it was at the time. Obviously, that is not an efficient source of electric heat.
Right.
But these high-efficient heat pump systems that install on your wall and basically look like a portable air conditioner that goes onto your wall, those are extremely efficient,
Right.
and people have that as an option.
Right. But
And,
I
and
really
now
think
that
the
the cost of
alternative-
oil has come down significantly, when did you convert?
Last year.
Last year, yeah. So right before the cost of oil broke.
Right.
So you were paying a really high price at one particular point, but now that the cost of oil has come down so much, there's very minimal difference between converting.
But that to me isn't as concerning as actually the climate change issue is. And I think that as we still have so many people who continually believe that climate change is not really an issue. Okay, so we have a hot winter. Yes, we have a hot summer, and we had an extremely cold or snowy winter, or you have a lot more rain, or there's they're not looking beyond their nose right here. They don't see where the droughts are. They haven't looked at the reservoirs in California or in Brazil. I mean, when you begin looking around the world at the magnitude of storms, the lack of rain, or the flooding that is occurring, people just don't seem to get it.
Right.
When you talk about methane, and we're allowing Shell to go up to the Arctic and drill, and that they've already identified the massive amounts of methane that are just under the ice, the glaciers that are up there.
Yeah.
Once you begin
The oil, yeah.
releasing some of this, it's going to magnify.
Scientists are telling us right now that all the fossil fuel reserves that are left in the ground currently that we are trying to tap into, we need to keep 90% of them in the ground.
in some places 100% like the Arctic. It
Yeah.
varies from locale, but
Yeah.
in the Arctic
Yeah.
it's 100%.
So, unfortunately, we don't have options. We're running out of time. So-
And I wanted to make a point about the methane clouds, because you guys were talking about that in the beginning and talking about in America. But the same thing has been identified in Russia. And what's happening is from the permafrost in Siberia, where permafrost is melting, huge clouds of methane are coming up. So it was spotted. I thought it was found in Russia before we heard about it here. And what happens is that creates a feedback loop for climate disruption, where once things start to melt, we can't turn it back because that more methane going into the atmosphere will continue to heat things. And so I just want to bring it back to, the issue issue of climate change, Bonnie, like what you're talking about, people don't need to look anywhere else but Connecticut to see the terrible fear from climate change. So it's happening here. Our state paid $1 billion for Hurricane Sandy, for Tropical Storm Irene, and for the 2011
Yeah, October.
nor'easter and combined costs
The October
just to our
snowstorm.
state. Obviously, New York paid much, much more. This May of 2015 was a record heat and drought month for many states, including many towns, in Connecticut, including my town. Climate change is now. And it's not something that's going to happen in the future. It's already happening, and there's total consensus on this worldwide. Not everybody reads science journals, and too many people watch the 6 o'clock news, which doesn't do a good job of, reporting on scientific issues. We know that. But the reality is that climate change is happening now, and certainly Jen is making a point about efficiency, which is crucial, because in order to change our energy policy, we need to be using less energy. So efficiencies are important, but I'm going to disagree with that by saying that until we have an electrical system that is not being run on poisonous substances that explode and destroy the climate, there's no benefit to it. What we need to do is everybody needs to conserve and use a lot less, and we need to, push our legislature and DEEP and so on and so forth to stop bringing in the frack gas and instead to use our public money to do it differently. So while I support things like, the ductless heating and doing all of the efficiency things, and we have to do that, I'm not going to buy an electric car until we're not getting so much of our electricity, which I'm dying. I want an electric car, but until the electrical system is powered cleanly, or at least much more cleanly than it is now.
This is where Martha and I disagree, because I'm buying an electric car within the next 2 months.
But your car died. Mine's still running, and you're died. You're died.
It is amazing, the technology in electric cars. Especially when it is an entirely electric car.
Yes.
And I never have to use oil, ever.
Yeah.
Gas, nothing.
Did you put a charger into your house?
I don't need a charger. It just plugs into
A
what
regular.
used to be the freezer.
The fridge outlet, right? The
Yeah.
360 or
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's all I need. And actually, the amount that I use it is much less
Yeah.
than I would a charger for the amount of driving. I can easily go to New York, and I stop, and there's no charge for me to charge. But you are correct. I'm fully aware where that electricity is coming from, and it has had me thinking that I should just get one solar panel that would just
For your
provide
house,
the
yeah.
electricity
Yeah.
for the car and for the pool. And that would be an option for me.
That's a good
But
idea.
not having, you are very correct. I can't have solar panels on my house. There's
have the
not
sunshine.
one. Yeah, there.
So you're the perfect case of somebody who needs share solar. And you need
That's
it right
what I
now.
said.
And you
Yes,
need it right
I
now.
need it right now.
Yeah, not 3
I
years,
would-
not 5 years.
I would do it
Yeah.
immediately now if I were able to do it.
Yeah.
I think that is an absolutely wonderful idea. There's also a new company in the United States that has both I don't know if you've seen it, but their mill solar. I think it's called the solar mill, because it has the wind turbines on the top and 3 solar panels
the
on the
base.
bottom. So it's a combination. So you get the wind power at night. We don't have a lot of wind in Connecticut. Norwich is located, we have some 7 hills around us. Again, those would be perfect locations for some wind farms.
Right. For Connecticut, we could probably get about 5% of our energy with wind turbines planted somewhere in our state. But we should be looking to getting about 45% of our wind energy from offshore wind farms. And we
Yes.
have a lot of wind that's just
That's-
south of us.
Yes.
That's just streaming across the Atlantic coast
Yeah.
in an area that's shallow, that's easy to start installing. What we need is the political will. We need
Yeah.
people to start
Yeah.
demanding that as a state, we're currently in the process of looking at our next 3-year energy policy, and people need to start speaking out to their local legislators, to the governor, to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and say, fracked gas is not the answer for us. Hydropower is not the answer. The large-scale hydropower coming down
Which
from
is
Canada,
different than the tidal stuff that you were
yeah,
referring to.
is not the answer for us. What we need to do is have bold leadership right now. We need to be transitioning to offshore wind and PV plants, solar PV plants.
Large scale, like what they're going to put in onto a capped landfill in Bridgeport.
Right. We need to be doing this right now. And
Yes.
instead, we are going to be spending
Billions.
billions of dollars bringing in
What a
these
waste.
huge pipelines.
It's worse than a waste.
What-
It's destroying the climate.
Yeah.
I mean, but
forever.
it is such a, there is no economic benefit to it.
Not to you
When
and
you-
I.
Well, short term,
Not even, to me, not even short term.
Yeah.
Because the short term would have been 30 years ago. That would have been short term. Right now, there isn't enough time left for anybody to spend, how many billion did you say this was going to cost?
Totally combined of all these pipelines is $3 billion, but it could wind up being more going into the future. That's what where costs are projected
Right now.
to be right now, but they probably would be more.
But even
And-
$3 billion, how many years would it take to recoup that amount of money?
And
We've already run out of time.
And not only that, Bonnie, but I want to talk about the fact that the gas itself is running out. So, you know, climate change is happening, and that's the real fear, and we have to stop, you know, extracting and burning this fossil fuel right now if we're going to slow that down. But you know, we're also worried about, you know, this transition and all the waste that's going to happen, and using public funds. So the legislature passed a bill at the end of the session, just this past spring, to say that Connecticut ratepayers will pay for some of those billions, not for all of them. Some of these pipelines will be paid for by the capital of these privately owned companies. But going into the future from about 2016 on, at which point only maybe one of the pipelines will be built, Connecticut ratepayers will be paying that cost. So we don't, and the gas itself is less than 20 years until that gas peters out. Right now, the overwhelming majority of wells that get fracked today are petered out by 7 to 8 years. They actually reach their maximum production about 2 to 3, petered out by 7 to 8. So 20 years into the future is an extreme hopeful view of how long we would still be getting gas. So we will still be paying for it, and it won't even be there anymore.
Which is why I said that there's no economic incentive to continually be going to fossil fuels.
It's an economic disincentive, but who it makes money for is industry. And since industry gives so much money to our politicians, that seems to be why they support it.
and fracked gas is not sustainable. As Martha mentioned, you know, these wells peter out within
Right.
a number of years.
And what do they leave behind? Talk about what is left behind.
Well, you know, currently the high volume wells that have been fracked in Pennsylvania are over 9,000 at the moment.
9,000
9,000.
Just in one state.
Just in one state alone.
that have already been,
that have already been fracked, drilled and fracked
And
in
left.
Pennsylvania.
That's-
that are still producing.
they are still
They are
producing.
still producing,
Okay.
yeah, because we've only been into this technology on a wide-scale basis since about 2008. So it's been less than 10 years, really.
But there are thousands and thousands of abandoned wells across America.
Yeah,
Thousands and thousands.
yeah, hundreds of thousands, actually, across the United States. And that's part of the problem, is that we have all these old abandoned wells. We're drilling and injecting all this toxic solution into the wells. There's something called frac hits, where, you know, when the well is being drilled, if there's faulty casing around the well bore, the toxic solution can intersect with an area where an abandoned well that nobody knew about is there. It just becomes like a conduit for this waste to just be able to travel. You know, we're already seeing groundwater being contaminated. We're seeing people's aquifers that supply their wells being contaminated with all this toxic solution. We're seeing spills on the surface that can seep through the ground. And that's why we're concerned about Connecticut. We do not want hundreds of thousands of gallons of waste being produced in Pennsylvania, or hundreds of millions of gallons of waste being produced in Pennsylvania. We don't want any of it crossing our border and coming into our state, because it would all be coming by tanker truck. The liquid waste would be coming in by tanker truck.
One spill.
So a spill in an area where there's a shallow aquifer, those liquids and radioactive radium can just seep right through the ground and permanently contaminate, and the cost of remediation is huge.
Right.
And that's
is
on the states.
enormous.
That's on the states.
Is
Industry
enormous.
doesn't
Let
pay.
me
Yeah.
let me ask. I mean,
Yeah.
you've said that there's only one, or there are three toxic waste.
There are 3 hazardous waste treatment facilities
Hazardous waste.
in Connecticut. If all 3 of them decide that they want to get a permit from DEEP and start processing this, It all depends on what
Deep's
kind of
regulations.
regulations Deep writes.
Let me
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
You've got 9,000 wells
In Pennsylvania.
in Pennsylvania.
Right. They're predicting drilling 80,000 wells in Marcellus Shale.
Okay, but
So,
let's start with
yeah.
just the 9,000.
Yeah.
That produces a significant amount of
Waste.
toxic waste.
Yeah. Every year they're drilling
What-
thousands more.
Name me one company that has the majority of those 9,000 wells. Can you just give me the name of one
Well,
company?
Cabot is one that's
Let's-
very active
Okay.
in the northeastern
How
part
many,
of
how many
Pennsylvania.
hazardous waste treatment facilities does Cabot have?
They contract their waste out to other people. The drillers,
So they have none.
the drilling companies that produce all the waste send their waste out to other suppliers or other handlers, basically.
So it would be Cabot that would be sending the waste directly to Connecticut.
Well, in
they-
Pennsylvania, a lot of the waste gets
just sitting
sent.
there right now.
It gets sent to centralized waste treatment facilities. So basically, they're mingling all the waste from multiple well sites.
God.
You know, this is why regulations won't work for us here in Connecticut. I've heard Commissioner Klee speak at conferences and say, well, we can track this waste from cradle to grave and we'll be able to assure that it's tested and what comes across our border won't be radioactive. Well,
Not true.
They're crazy.
it's impossible
Right.
to be able to do that. There are scientists and research groups that have already tried to track the waste from cradle to grave, and it's not happening. The reason is they're producing so much of it, they have to get rid of it off of these well sites. They send it from one site to the next. Sometimes they do some partial treatment so that they can reuse it over and over and over again. They're piping it from one well site to the next. It's being trucked by tanker truck from
And it's
one site to the
contaminated,
next.
and these contaminants spill off
It's
of the
being
trucks.
sent to these centralized waste facilities, and it's all being commingled together. It's being reused over and over again
Being reused at other wells.
at other wells.
rather
yeah.
than
Using
So
fresh
that's-
water, they
Right,
use that a lot
right.
there.
Yeah.
Because that is another concern,
Yeah.
the amount of water.
Right.
And we don't have an abundant water supply.
Well, this is partly why they're starting to reuse
Yeah.
the waste. They're
I mean,
they're starting
California,
to
if they ever had any
Yeah.
kind of fracking going on in
Yeah.
California, it would
Yeah.
be,
they're treating portions of it. They're reusing it, but they still have to mix it with, again, millions of gallons of fresh water are still being used. You know, we are using up our potable water,
Can we
and
bring those-
it never comes back. Even once it's treated to the maximum ability, it never
Never
comes back
safe.
to drinking water standards
Ever.
ever again.
never.
Ever again.
And
never.
let's bring that back to Connecticut,
Yeah.
that we're concerned about our drinking water quality here from the pipelines, although it's not exactly the same as the fracking waste, but these issues are related because what's coming through these pipelines is fracked gas. The Hartford MDC is concerned
MDC?
about the Metropolitan District Commission. They're a municipal corporation that's responsible for getting all the clean water to people in the Hartford area.
If people have ever been out to West Hartford where they have the beautiful reservoir system
Yeah.
that you can go hiking on the trails, that's the MDC.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
multiple reservoirs, and they've written a letter now to Kinder Morgan, who's an owner of different interstate pipelines coming than the AIM, the one that goes through Norwich and here in eastern Connecticut.
Yeah, Algonquin, yeah.
But the Hartford MDC wrote a letter to FERC saying that they have concerns about the NED pipeline, the Northeast Energy Direct, which is going to be going through Hartford County and other parts of the state. It's a smaller pipeline than the Algonquin. But they're concerned about drinking water quality from the pipeline going through those lands that Jen was talking about, which is
Just
the
the
watershed.
pipeline.
Just the pipeline itself. And you had asked a question earlier about, well, how can the pipelines leak? I mean, especially if they're new. And I want to just briefly talk about the fact that there's been many more explosions. There's been a big increase in pipeline explosions and leaks within the last number of years. We've had a lot of pipeline explosions and leaks in our country, but it's increased recently, and that might be because of the quality of what's moving through here. So shale gas and shale oil are more flammable, more explosive. Also, when you have enlarged pipelines, you have higher pressures, and that causes a greater explosion radius. So even though the pipeline itself might be new, and we think, oh, that would be good, the product that's inside of it is also new and terribly more dangerous. And so that could be contributing to why we're seeing more leaks and more explosions. And so there are some bodies in Connecticut that are saying we need to be concerned about our natural resources from these pipelines, and we're beginning to see a lot more pushback. There's been a ton of pushback against these pipelines, not so much in Connecticut, but in New York, where they're terribly worried
Right.
about
New
Indian
York
Point
is-
Nuclear Power Plant being
Right.
right 100 feet away from this new expanded pipeline,
Right.
and also in Massachusetts, where they have a much more historically stronger environmental movement, and they've been fighting back against interstate pipelines. And but here in Connecticut, what's happened is that we've had this huge expansion in these intrastate, or that is to say, converting individual people to use more power, and that's really been coming from our Department of Energy, from DEEP. They're the ones who've been taking our ratepayer money to convert people. They do continual advertising. You hear them on the radio and TV all the time saying, get gas, you know, come and do these conversions.
Right. I think that I was really surprised by the bill that actually put the cost of doing the pipeline actually not on the companies that are, but on the
Ratepayers.
On the ratepayers.
Yeah, you had asked, you know, what places in Connecticut are we using gas to produce energy? If you go to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's website, you can find a map that has them all plotted, and there are dozens throughout the state.
Right.
And so you can see that there.
We-
The one
we-
that exploded in Middletown a couple years ago, about 4 years ago, that was a
2010.
brand new
Gas.
facility.
That was
Gas
brand new.
fired, yeah, well, it
It was
yeah.
in the process of being
It was in-
constructed when it
it was
exploded.
90% done being built.
No old pipes, no.
No,
brand new.
brand new facility, and it exploded and had
Killed
to be
6 people and
Yeah.
injured 50.
Yeah, and then a couple years to the date of the explosion, it had another fire in one of its turbines, I believe, 2 or 3 years to the date.
Right.
Yeah, so.
Well, this hour went by very, very quickly, ladies. I'm overwhelmed with the amount of information that we've received tonight. You only began the discussion on the legislation that Connecticut is considering and the direction we're going in. Next week's guest is an attorney that works specifically on the Connecticut legislation for energy and the environment. So that discussion will continue then. I really absolutely appreciate both of you for being here, for putting on the presentation that you did a couple weeks ago, letting us know about not just the fracking issue, but the pipeline coming through. I'm really kind of disappointed that, you know, I fell for it, and I really thought I was doing something good for the environment when we went to natural gas, but I guess if I had given it a little bit more thought, I would have said, well, and I think I did. I think I said, well, it's got to be better than oil.
A lot of people believe
And-
that, unfortunately, because of the public relation campaign.
Right.
Clean natural gas is what everybody's believing.
Clean, it's clean.
Yeah, it's far
And
from
so
clean.
you really kind of, and you know that it does burn cleaner, so we were getting less carbon dioxide. I did not think about, you know, the methane. And I'm getting the signal to absolutely wrap it up. So thank you to Jen Siskine, Martha Klein. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks,
and
Bonnie.
we will
Thank
be
you.
back next week with Norwich Confidential.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That was good.